Hope everyone's not too warm. We're starting today talking about sleep. It's always a bit of a emotive subject with many people. Everyone has different opinions and different kind of factors that influence how well they do sleep. So we thought we'd start by kind of talking about, we can do it in small groups if you're happy to, or do people just want to feedback? What would people prefer? Small groups? Feedback? Yeah, okay. So we want to think about how well do you sleep at the moment, and I'm aware that it might be influenced by the weather at the moment, that perhaps the last few nights haven't been great, but generally, how well are you sleeping at the minute, and what would you consider to be a good night's sleep? Yeah, and I think that's pretty much picking up on the point that it is very individual, and everyone has very different sleeping patterns, and that's what makes it such quite an emotive subject, because I think we all know how the effect that lack of sleep can have on us, really. I'm sure we've all been there, those early mornings when we feel like zombified almost. We have kind of sugar cravings by 9 a.m. We don't really want to do anything other than get on the caffeine and eat, and that's because we are in quite a sleep deprived state. And as quite a new mum, I'm fully aware of that broken sleep and the effect that it can have on relationships as well, because you argue more because the effect that it has on your mood. And we see a lot of patients with sleep problems, and I think one of the biggest things that comes out is that there isn't a quick fix. That people think there can be in forms of medication, and unfortunately these things don't work longer term. So we wish we did have a magic wand which we could wave and help people with their sleep, because we know the effect that it can have, but unfortunately there isn't a quick fix. And I think the aim of today is to go through a few things that perhaps to consider, and how small changes can hopefully make a big impact. And as we've said, there's multiple internal and external factors. So work patterns, shifts that you might be doing, children that you have to look after, medical conditions, all these things can really play a part. So why should we make it a priority? We spend a third of our lives asleep, and a third is quite a significant amount of time. And by appreciating and understanding that, and getting to grips with the fact of how it can have such an impact on other elements of our well-being, can make it seem to us that we should be really making it a priority. And it's not just relevant for those people that struggle with sleep. I think when we're looking at our diet and when we're looking at how much we move in the day, focusing on sleep can really help those things as well. So that's why we're talking about it today, because it really is a foundation for what all those other pillars can sit on. And there are studies that show when people are trying to address their diet and perhaps looking at a calorie controlled diet, so to speak, when they are doing that in a sleep deprived state, then 70% of that can come off of muscle mass rather than our fat stores. And that's because when we're in a sleep deprived being kind of state, then the body wants to hold on to that fat, and it doesn't want to let that go, because we're in kind of a state of emergency in our bodies. They found that motivation's reduced to do any kind of movement, and if you are going to do a workout, then the intensity of that tends to be less and also less effective. And they also found that the chance of injury is also quite increased. So it's a power enhancer that's bi-directional. So by that we mean if you look at sleep, then that will help movement and looking at your diet, but by improving that, then it improves your sleep as well. So all of these things really help us to think that we should be addressing, even if we're not really struggling with sleep at the moment, but just making sure it's a priority in our mind, that we are getting enough of it. And just one final point about how it does help us kind of process information. A famous Russian psychologist said that 19 hours awake is the same as being over the drink drive limit, with 1 second to 12-second reaction times. So that's quite a significant change. And we do obviously consider how much we drink, I hope, before we drive, but we should also be thinking about how well we're sleeping as well. And then longer term, if you stay in a state of sleep deprivation, it can increase your risk of dementia, diabetes, hypertension, and general inflammation in the body, which can lead to long-term mental health problems. So it'll be no surprise to anyone that we are sleeping less than ever before. So compared to kind of 1940s, we sleep an hour less on average, and children about an hour and a half less. And this is because of our change in kind of work patterns. Lots of us do longer hours, but it's also a change in modern technology. So this might look familiar. Hopefully it doesn't, but people sat with laptops in bed, and that unnatural light just before we go to sleep can really impact the quality of sleep that we have. there's a study done in by a UK journalist over 6 months. And for this 6 months, she took her melatonin levels every day. And melatonin is a hormone that's produced to tell us to go to sleep, essentially. And for half that time, so for 3 months, she lived by candlelight, which does seem quite extreme. But she didn't have any computers or phones or anything in the evening before bed. And in the daytime, she made a real effort to walk to work, run outside, and increase her natural light. And then for the other 3 months, she lived normally, which using phones and laptops and things before bed. And she found that her melatonin was released about an hour and a half earlier on those days where she was living by candlelight and more natural means. And she was also falling asleep about an hour and a half to 2 hours earlier. And I mean, I know that's extreme measures, living by candlelight, but small changes of perhaps not using your phone or you're watching TV kind of in the hour before bed, it can make a huge difference to our natural rhythm in our body. And I'm pretty sure if there was a drug that did that, then we'd all be encouraged to wanting to take that. So it's definitely something to consider. And also our accessibility to the world has changed. I'm sure some of you, and I'm quite bad for this, that your phone, you know where it is when you wake up in the morning. You can reach for your phone, or it's you might put it on charge next to your bed. And that accessibility to the world 24 hours a day can be quite unhealthy for our mental health, as well as kind of the effect it has on our sleep. So it's worth considering whether you need your phone in your bedroom environment or whether it's worth leaving downstairs and switching off properly before you go to bed. So how much sleep do we need? There's a professor called Matthew Walker that wrote a book called Why We Sleep. That's it. And it's very good. And one of the things that he asks is 2 questions. So do you feel refreshed in the morning when you wake up after your sleep? And do you wake before your alarm? If the answer to both these questions is yes, then perhaps you are getting the right amount of sleep that you need. If you don't feel that either of those apply, then sleep is something that you perhaps should be looking at a little bit more. And with patients, we tend to do a little bit more, can go into more detail by asking questions about the timing and the duration of their sleep and how alert they feel in the day. But those 2 first questions can be a really good indicator initially. And I think they did a study which showed only 15% of the UK actually would answer yes to both those questions. And that's kind of an indicator that perhaps we should be putting a bit more priority on thinking about how well we are sleeping. So there is an argument to perhaps think about more a quality of your sleep rather than the quantity that you get. So rather than focusing on I need 8 hours a night, we should be thinking that when we do go to bed that we're getting quite good quality sleep. And there are some things that can affect that, alcohol being one of them. Alcohol is a sedative. And by that, people think, oh, that means that, it will help me sleep. And people are often having a nightcap before they go to bed. This is not true. Alcohol will fragment your sleep. So you might not be aware of waking throughout the night, but the next day you won't feel restored. And that isn't just the effect of having a hangover, it's the effect of quite broken sleep that the alcohol will have produced. It can block certain parts of your sleep cycle. And they say that 1 unit of alcohol is the equivalent to about 1 hour's sleep of like that quality. Caffeine also has a role. So half-life of caffeine is 4 to 5 hours. So that means that 5 hours after you have that coffee, half of it will still be in your system. And after 12 hours, a quarter of it's still in your system. So if you were to have a really strong, large Starbucks at midday, at midnight, the quarter of that is still in your system. And I imagine not all of us are swigging quarter of a cup of coffee before we go to bed, but effectively that is the same. And lots of us will say we're immune to the fact that caffeine has on us. My parents are, the ones that will always order coffee after their meal. However, they might just not be aware of the fact that it is breaking up their sleep. And it's been shown to reduce deep sleep waves by 20%. So again, it will fragment your sleep, perhaps without you.
Will that harm us as well?
Sorry? Tea. If it's got caffeine in it. Same equivalent. So how can we address our sleep? So I think it's good to think about it in kind of 2 ways. So we think about before sleep. So how do you disconnect at the end of each day? I thought about this a couple of years ago when I moved house. I used to have a longer commute, and now I live about 8 minutes from where I work. And I found that it really did have an impact on me driving home. I didn't have that time to kind of think about my day and switch off. And I think it's important that before you go to bed, you are having an hour and a half time of, your mind being free from your worries from the day. And however you manage to do that, whether that is switching off, talking to loved ones, or reading, or having a bath, it's important that you do think about how you disconnect. And are you doing enough in the day to be tired? So we see, particularly, that's right, through the pandemic, when people are working from home, not having set structure in their day, lots more struggled with sleep. And I think having some routine more in your day and making sure that you are tired when you get into bed can really help. And does your body know it's bedtime? So I had a newborn that, he still is, horrendous at sleeping, and there's lots of books that you can read and sleep consultants that can advise, and they all look at sleep cues for them knowing that it's time for bedtime, and that's routine. And I think it's quite applicable as adults as well, that you need your mind to know that when you get into bed, then that's the time you are going to be going to sleep. And it is really important for that hour before that you do have a bit of a routine, so your mind knows that it's time to go to bed. I think we can look at things, avoiding alcohol 3 hours before bedtime. And as we say, avoiding caffeine after approximately midday can help. So we come on to kind of thinking about our environment. It's important to consider light exposure, as we've said. So reducing screen time. You can get things, you can put your phones in boxes beside your bed, or making a thing of leaving them downstairs. And fresh air and exercise kind of in the mid to late afternoon can certainly help increase your natural daylight. And also after sleep. So when you wake up in the morning, if you're consistently tired, you should be thinking about your whole structure and week and what you're doing. So it's great to have lie-ins, but if they are consistently needing huge lie-in at the weekend, you should be thinking, well, what's going wrong in the week to mean that this is the case? And that morning time really does matter. So having a think about that and thinking about your routine, and avoiding the snooze button. So I'm definitely guilty of this. That 5 more minutes that you feel you're giving your body, it's not working. That's not quality sleep that you're having, and you're better that as soon as your mind's there to get up, rather than keep pressing the snooze button. So to sum up, really, I think we just want to point out that sleep is part of one of the pillars of well-being, because it can have such an impact on the other settings when you are trying to think about how you are functioning. And by making it a priority, it really can help. We should think more of quality over quantity of sleep. So rather than think how many hours you're getting, think about the how you're actually going to sleep and the time that you are. And then going back to the basics can really help. So thinking about your daylight, thinking about unnatural light, and thinking about the routine before bed. So hopefully some of that was useful. Does anyone have any questions?
Great. So the last session of the series, the last pillar of well-being, stress and relaxation. And it can be quite a tricky one, but what we'll do talking about stress and relaxation is we'll go through a few key points because there's a lot to talk about. So we'll cover a little bit about the science or the biology of stress. We'll talk a little bit about acute or short-term immediate stress versus long, drawn-out or chronic stress. What this means, why stress can be a problem, and also what we can do about it. So if we start a little bit talking about what stress actually is, I think the first thing to get out there is that stress is an essential part of being a human being. We actually need stress. It's neither inherently good nor bad. It's a biological process in our body, and it allows us to react to threats to our lives, or threats of violence, for example, being attacked by a wild animal, or if a car is coming toward you at speed in order to get you out of the way or to fight with the animal or run away, you need that stress response. That the signals that go to your brain release hormones like cortisol, and these have a specific response in the body. They raise your heart rate to get your blood pumping around the body. They get your breathing rate up. You're breathing a lot faster so that you can get oxygen to your muscles and to all the essential organs. The cortisol specifically can raise your blood sugar levels in order to get all that good sugar to where it needs to be so that you can act in the situation that you're in. So if you're threatened by a wild animal or something, you've got the energy to fight it or to run away. So that's the acute response. And obviously in the developed world, in the modern world, we're not constantly at the threat of violence for the most part, or death for the most part. So it's more the chronic, long drawn out stress that we're exposed to. And that is a product of the environment that we live in. So our busy lives, worrying about mortgages, worrying about rent, worrying about stress from work and in our personal lives and the responsibilities that we have. These provide a smaller but sustained dose of stress throughout our daily lives. And that can accumulate to have some negative effects. And the reason we think that long-term stress is negative is that we believe it might be linked to that magic word, that inflammation that we've discussed in a few of the previous weeks. So inflammation as the possible root cause of many long-term illnesses that, like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and there's a lot of research, particularly by the World Health Organization, a few other organizations, that list stress alongside cardiovascular disease and diabetes as some of the biggest contributors to ill health in the modern world. And then to go beyond that and link stress as a possible root cause of some of those illnesses makes it all the more important to think about. So stress is neither good nor bad, but a sustained high level of stress throughout our lives can lead to inflammation, can lead to ill effects. So what do we do about it? I think that's often the difficult question that we have, is what can I actually do about stress? I live a busy life, I have all these responsibilities, I simply can't see what I can do. But I think the aim of the session today is to look at what are the things that we can do and what can we understand about stress so that we can begin to acknowledge it and manage our response to it in a more efficient and effective way. Because anybody that tells you that there's these 5 things that you can do to completely rid your life of stress and eliminate stress altogether, quite frankly, isn't telling the truth. Because we need stress, we need it in our bodies, we need it to be motivated to continue living and doing and carrying out the functions that we need to carry out day to day. But we need the right dose, we need the right amount, we need to manage our response to that stress in order to be successful in all those things that we need to do. So there are a few things we can think about. So thinking back to the 5 pillars of well-being that we've already discussed. So we've mentioned that stress could be linked to inflammation. So practicing anti-inflammatory things. So we've talked about purpose and meaning, connections, movement, what we put in our bodies, our nutrition, and we just mentioned sleep as well. So trying to look at those areas of our lives and see if there's any improvements we can make to those pillars of our well-being will inherently have an anti-inflammatory effect and reduce our harmful stress response and try to put that back into balance. There are some specific things we can do to counteract the negative effects of excess stress and promote that relaxation or promote that sort of counter effect on the negative effects that stress could be having on our bodies. And that's things like practicing gratitude. There's actually a podcast I was listening to by a chap called Rangan Chatterjee, and he plays a game with his family every night. They sit around the dinner table, and practicing gratitude might sound a bit unnatural, might be something that's not everybody's comfortable to do, but he simplifies it with this game by going around his family and saying, you know, what did you do today to make somebody happy? What did somebody do today to make you happy? What are you grateful for, and what have you learned today? And they're simple questions. They can be done with family, with friends, and it can spark up conversation. And it can start with very, very simple things. I'm grateful that it's a sunny day. Maybe not so grateful that it's excessively hot, but grateful that I have a roof over my head. Very, very basic things, all the way to life goals that we've achieved. Because there's always some silver lining or some things that we might be grateful for, and they can counteract the effects of the negative things that happen in our day that bring our stress levels up. It's about finding that balance. Mindfulness is another thing to mention. Now, it's a big topic, so we probably won't have enough time to go into it in too much detail, and we can always talk about it a little bit more in the Q&A. But mindfulness is essentially a practice of practicing awareness of your breath, of your immediate environment, what's going on around you, how your feet feel on the floor, how you feel if you're seated or standing, and essentially being aware of your immediate environment, the sounds and the sensations that you're experiencing. It's not necessarily about being in a meditative state of completely clearing your mind of any thoughts. It's about accepting that those thoughts are going to come and then going back to the practice again. And a lot of stress management and relaxation is about accepting that you are going to be stressed and that there are things that are out of your control that are going to influence your mood and potentially your well-being, but about trying to manage your response to those things. And that's the aim with mindfulness. There's good evidence that reconnecting with nature can also help our stress levels. So in Japan, there is a practice called forest bathing, where people intentionally go out into parks, forests, and wild areas in order to reconnect with nature. And there's some good evidence to show that this can reduce your stress levels. For any mathematicians out there who are familiar with fractals, there are natural fractals that occur in nature, in the branches of trees, in the capillaries of animal bodies, and just having exposure to these has shown some early evidence that they might reduce our stress levels as well as some of the substances that are emitted from plants and from being around trees. Now, we might not be blessed enough to go out into a jungle or a forest to enjoy sort of wide natural spaces, but we can make our own natural spaces. We can tend to gardens, we can go to local parks and practice any one of these things that are mentioned that might resonate with us a little bit more. And I think going back to the practice of forest bathing, what I'd really like to focus on is the intention. So those people that are practicing the forest bathing or the exposure to nature, they're making a choice. They're intentionally taking time out to do something that they feel is benefiting their general well-being and reducing their stress levels. We might find it very difficult in our day to make time to relax. You might say that, I'm really, really busy. I've got these deadlines. I have all these personal, social, and professional responsibilities. But having the intention to refresh and recharge ourselves in order to be efficient at those responsibilities that we do have can be a motivating factor to get us moving towards reducing our stress levels in a healthy way that promotes well-being. So with that in mind, having talked about sleep and having talked about stress and relaxation, I'd like everyone to sort of think about what goals can you set? Do you think you can find any space in your lives to set goals that are in line with improving your sleep, reducing your levels of stress, promoting relaxation, even if that's in parts throughout the day in small chunks, having a look at what challenges you might face along the way, what could stop you. I just simply don't have time in my day. I just simply can't nod off to sleep. I wake up in the night. But having a look at, how could I overcome these challenges? Do I need to think a bit more deeply about why that might be happening? And how can I fit that into my wellness practice in order to improve my sleep or reduce my stress levels and relaxation? And it's always important to see how can we be supported? Can we have a buddy or somebody to hold us accountable for making those changes to achieve those goals? And what can we do along the way to help ourselves achieve those goals? And then making it something measurable. So how will I know if I'm sleeping better? Is it because I wake up before my alarm? Is it because I wake up feeling refreshed? Do I not need to have that nap later in the day if I'm somebody who feels the need to nap later in the day? What are the signs that I'm doing well and I'm progressing along my journey in achieving these goals? We have a few minutes to have a think about that, perhaps breaking up into groups for this part and having a little chat, and then we can come back with a few of our thoughts for the beginning.